Ladies and gents, welcome back. We know that the Trudeau's government's environmental measures are extremely short-sighted, but we're now learning that 30% reductions in nitrogen fertilizer would not only be extremely damaging to the agricultural business sector, but will do very little in terms of cleaning up the environment in an industry that is already so efficient. We have here from True North, liberal fertilizer climate target would have negligible impacts on emissions, an expert says. An agrologist told parliamentarians that Prime Minister Trudeau's arbitrary 30% fertilizer emissions reduction target for farmers would have a negligible impact on global CO2 levels. Robert Sask found that CO2 of AgVisor Pro told the House of Commons Environmental Committee on October 4th that the 30% reduction in agriculture emissions would amount to a cut of only 0.0028% of 1% of global greenhouse gases. It recognized that Canada produces about 1.6% of global emissions. Agriculture is about 10% of Canada's emissions, and fertilizer is 17% of agriculture's emissions, or 1.75% of Canada's greenhouse gas emissions, explained Sake. So if we reduce our emissions by 30% in Canada from all fertilizer sources, that would amount to about 0.0028, which I think actually is a typo because the number is actually 0.00028. And here's the original tweet here. You need to watch this agricultural expert break down how farmers are already capturing 150% of CO2 emissions. Trudeau's arbitrary 30% fertilizer emissions reduction would only reduce emissions by 0.00028%. Why is our government jeopardizing our food supply for meager gains?
Produce that farmers grow. Farmers capture 132% of their total CO2e emitted, and when you take soil into account, that's 150%. This grain is being shipped internationally, meaning that Canada's crop farmers are 30 million metric tons CO2e to the positive. We take into account cow burps in the national inventory. It's recognized the carbon stored in soils, and we recognize the carbon stored in forestry. So we should be thinking about the carbon that's stored in grain. And we do that, we come up positive. But the focus is on fertilizer. It's recognized that Canada produces about 1.6% of the global emissions. Agriculture is about 10% of Canada's global emissions. And fertilizer is 17% of agriculture's emissions, or 1.75% of Canada's greenhouse gas emissions. So if we reduced our emissions by 30% in Canada from all fertilizer sources, it would amount to 0.0028 of 1%. So that's really what we're talking about here. And I'm here to talk to you about agriculture technology, precision ag, slow release fertilizers, etc. Thanks for inviting.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk to experts in their fields, not politicians with platitudes. We're talking about an industry that is already extremely efficient. These farmers, they don't have much margins to begin with, so they don't want to waste fertilizer by just letting it run off into the water table or into runoff. They want to use every bit of it, absolutely. So they use experts like this to make sure that it all ends up in plants and not in the soil. We have here an update from the Dutch farmers, because we know that the Dutch farmers have been going through this. I always include the Dutch flag in support of the Dutch farmers, of course. Update on them. Our criminal government has announced yesterday that they'll be speeding up the theft of our farmers' land. 500 to 600 farmers will be forced to sell their land to the state in the next year. The farmers have announced new protests. Stay tuned. Now, these are brought about by these nitrogen fertilizer plans. They want to reduce fertilizers by 30% in the Netherlands. Familiar number, very familiar number here. We have Eva Vlaardingerbroek, I hope I pronounced that correctly, also putting it out on Twitter. The Dutch government is ramping up the expropriation of our farmers, driving some of them to commit suicide. They're a bunch of inhumane, greedy liars and thieves who created fake crisis to rob people of their rights and their property. This is what the Free West is about.
You'd think it is too crazy to be true, but it's not too crazy because our government consists of a bunch of inhumane, greedy liars and thieves. So like you said, they are going to forcefully buy out 600 farms in the next year. They say, of course, that it's because of a nitrogen crisis, which is completely manufactured and made up. We don't have a nitrogen crisis. They are taking away these people's property. They are taking away their lives. They are taking away businesses that have been in Dutch families for centuries sometimes, and people are becoming desperate. We had a farmer last week, 43-year-old man who killed himself because he said he couldn't take it anymore, and he's not the only one. There are countless of examples like him. I can't stress this enough. We have a government that says everything that you worked for, that you own, your life, your livelihood, doesn't matter. I want it, and so I get it. You have nothing to say about it. Is that really what the Free West is about? Is that what we want? Is that something that we should accept for any type of crisis that they can just create out of thin air? It's insane. And we should stand up against it. And I hope that the farmers will start doing it again. And they said they will, and I will support them 110%.
As we will here as well. And we're supporting our farmers here in Canada as this story comes out from the Post Millennial. Again, links in the description down below. Oh, as always, check out the description to find the links to the original articles. Post Millennial writes, a quarter of Canadian farmers considered ending their own lives. In the past year, the study, researchers out of the University of Guelph revealed that Canadian farmers' mental health worsened during the pandemic at a higher rate than the general population. 1 in 4 saying they felt it was not worth living. Again, I'll leave a link in the description down below for that. The other article, that I was referring to from True North, get back to some of that. There are a number of measured devices that are being experimented with right now. If I was asked categorically if there was one that you would depend on, I would say no, said Sec. And this is the agricultural minister, Marie-Claude Bibeau, has tried to dismiss concerns from farmers as feeding into is so-called misinformation but yet has to address concerns about how targets would impact yields or doubts about the accuracy of measuring emissions from fertilizer use. They're still trying to do regression analysis to find out if these measurement devices, satellite imagery to ascertain carbon in soils is still a long way off. Western Canadian wheat growers President Gunter Jochum also told True North News in August that no current baseline exists to determine true emissions. So this is what a lot of the speculation for why the federal government was pushing into Saskatchewan earlier this year and trespassing on farmers' lands and taking water samples. There was some controversy over that, and they believed that they were trying to get a baseline measurement. I would like to know where they got their facts from, said Jochum. I believe that these facts were entirely made up because in Canada, we don't even have baselines as to what the true emissions are. A recent poll found that 72% of farmers have concerns that their crop yields and food production would plummet should they follow through with the voluntary reduction targets before they become mandatory, of course. But as is being seen in the Netherlands, if they push these policies through, it's just going to lead to bankruptcy of farmers. So again, standing with our farmers and standing up for them against these nitrogen policies that seem to have no basis in reality when it comes to actually helping the environment. If we're actually trying to help the environment, we would really want people buying Canadian produce. that would be a big thing. With the produce waning in Canada, if we have less produce here, if we ruin our food supply and have a 30% reduction in our yields, we'll have to likely start getting our food from other places, which would come from bigger polluters and also have to come on trucks, which comes with the advent of polluting. So if we're going to bring things on trucks, let's bring other things that we can't produce here within our own country. And let's leave our farmers alone to do the fantastic bang-up job that they have been doing for so long. Anyway, leave a comment in the comment section down below. Let me know what you think on this story. If you're not yet subscribed to the channel and you've been watching a few of these videos, please consider subscribing today. Also hit that notification bell. It lets you know when I go live. We'll see you in the next one. Keep on trucking.